So a little bit more about the other types of analytics that we offer before we get into the invoicing, which is the last piece. We just had the IMPA introduction by Stephen and Don, and before the launch of that, we actually provided a tool for the buyers to benchmark the IMPA number on the platform. And as a lot of the buyers are using IMPA numbers, this was possible. So they could actually log in and see a trend of a certain item with an IMPA number, what the price range was in a specific port, to see if what they pay is above or below the average. Again, it's aggregated information, so no specific buyer or supplier is disclosed here, except for the ones that the buyer is actually dealing with. So the suppliers that specific buyer is dealing with is of course visible to that buyer. The supplier performance report is, you can say, an extension or part of the spend analytics, the whole thing that you want to do with your spend, that you also get a way to analyze your suppliers. And equivalently, we have a tool on the supplier side where they can work strategically to analyze their buyers. And this is the whole philosophy of what we do. We have never been a buyer platform or a supplier platform. We have always focused on being a platform creating efficiencies and transparency throughout the whole chain, so to speak. So the supplier performance report for the buyer, this is the buyer side, will provide a quick overview of the spend, the RFQs, the quotes, etc., with that specific supplier. It will also give the buyer an idea about how many RFQs have been ignored, etc., etc. And on the supplier side, we provide a similar thing, the sales funnel. How many RFQs have you received? How many quotes have you sent? And what is the success rate on your RFQ to POs, for example? It will also give you a value, how much of the volume from this period, this is a period that has been taken from, has been done through direct POs, that means no foregoing RFQ quotes, and how much of it is through competitive POs, which means situations where the supplier has been in competition with other suppliers. So staying a little bit with the supplier side, the next level of this is the level where you also will get an analysis on the time to quote. How often have you won when you have been the fastest to quote? What is your average quoting time? What is the competition, their quoting time? Do you believe that quoting fast is equal to a likelihood of getting the order? Perhaps you need to quote faster if you think that is true. Do you think the price is the most important factor? Then you need to be competitive, of course. Perhaps it's a combination. It probably is, but at least you get a very quick way of being informed about how you're doing compared to the average, and perhaps that gives you some ways to see if there's something that you need to clean up in your organization. And on the right side, a PO value analysis per client. And drilling further down to this, you will again have the overview of the clients on the left. You will have the time that it takes you to quote these clients, and also the PO value you get out of it. So again, you can combine the time your quoting time, your prices to the success rate, and work tactically, strategically with that. So going back to the buyer side, so the buyer will get an overview of the total spend that they have with a given supplier. It will show the trends over the period that the buyer has defined. It will show the response rates, how many RFQs are you actually responding to, what is the average for all the suppliers that you're dealing with, and what is the ShipServe average. So again, it gives you an idea about how this supplier is performing with you as a buyer. But this is also a good tool to use with the supplier as a tool when you have the yearly negotiations because there could be some issues where you say, to me, it's not really important how fast you quote. It's more important that you are competitive on the price and that you deliver, because there could be issues related to deliveries as well. Other KPIs provided along these lines is the average response time, the quote completeness. Quote completeness is an interesting thing. Why does a supplier only quote 8 out of 10 line items every time? Perhaps it's because the buyer always asks them something they don't sell. Right? This is something you need to discuss. But again, this is a collaboration tool. It's not a one-sided tool. It's something for both sides to use. Competitiveness in this situation. So we will also measure when you on the buyer side are sending RFQs out to multiple suppliers, whether the price was the most important for you or the time sensitivity, in other words, how quickly the supplier responded to you. Again, something that you can use in your discussions with your suppliers. And on the co-quotas, those are situations where you have actually asked other suppliers for quotes, you have received a quote, you have sent the PO, and when you do an analysis on this supplier, we will actually display to you the other suppliers that you have asked throughout this time period, and we will tell you if you have decided to buy more expensively from this supplier than from others. Of course, there can be deviations in the number of line items. There could be some changes, but from a general perspective, we can give you an indication that you may constantly pay more. Maybe it's a decision on your side. Maybe you have decided to pay more from a supplier because you know that supplier is always delivering on time and the right quality and all that stuff. That's fine. But at least it will be flagged to you. It will also be flagged to you that, because the supplier side here is probably thinking, well, that means that every time I'm out with my buyer clients, I have the risk that someone else can squeeze in and get the order the next time because ShipServe is helping the buyer to see who is cheaper. Well, it also works the other way around. Perhaps you are cheaper and they have chosen someone else, and the next time you as a supplier are actually the one who will be suggested to the buyer. But again, it's about visibility. It's how development goes. And the old days where everything was something in between two people having an agreement about something, it's kind of over. There's so many tools available out there to work strategically with the procurement. Again, one specific supplier here. What do you buy the most from them? What does each of your purchasers spend with this supplier? And again, the spend per vessel. Okay, invoicing. So, invoicing is a subject that has been discussed, I think also from I started in this part of the marine industry, so around 2000. A lot of companies talked about, we want invoicing. Okay, so what is it you want? Well, maybe you can tell us. No. We need to understand what it is, the need is out there. And there are many invoice solutions in the market space already. A lot of them are focused on workflow. So that will be invoice software that you install in your infrastructure, and the moment you have the invoice in the system or import it, it will go through the workflow. You need approvals, etc., maybe superintendents, maybe fleet managers, and so on. So that part we're not touching here. So what we're doing is that we have developed an invoice platform. You can call it a portal. And if you look at the ShipServe philosophy from the early days, is that we want to create a space in the middle where we connect buyer and supplier. That's what you see on the top here. So the whole flow between buyer and supplier is run through our platform. Buyers connect once, suppliers connect once, and everything flows there. It is exactly the same we're going to do with invoices. So our platform will be used as a platform where suppliers can upload the invoice, match it to the PO, and the same information will then be available on the buyer side. So they can import it into their internal workflow. So it's a platform, a collection area for invoices. And then you can ask yourself, from the buyer side especially, what is that benefiting us? We already have asked our suppliers to send invoices to us. Yes, but if you think about it, you have one supplier, they're dealing with you and maybe 50 other buyers or 100 other buyers. And every buyer wants them to send to a different email address, to log in, to upload, to do all sorts of different things. That is going away with what we are launching. We give them one place to upload their invoices, and then they can be extracted to the buyer side. That's the whole idea. That's the whole original idea of TradeNet, and that's the idea of the Invoice platform. So going back to this first one, so that is the first version of it. It will be the platform. The next phases in this will be credit notes, delivery receipts, etc., etc. There will be split orders, there will be canceled orders, there will be all these things that you need to deal with as well. But primarily, you need to deal with them in your internal system. But those are the next phases that we will come out with. And I have a few screenshots of what the solution will look like, both on the buyer and the supplier side. So the supplier interface will have, when the supplier logs into this, we'll have an overview of the POs they have received with pending invoices. They will have a section with sent invoices and one with draft invoices. This is just to, you can say, pick up everything. If you're in the middle of something you have to leave, it will save it as a draft. The work is not lost. So the supplier will then go into each of these POs and will be asked to, and as you can see, the information is already pre-populated, the PO number, the vessel, etc., all this basic information. The supplier will then enter the invoice number, the invoice number, the invoice date, a due date. They will attach an invoice and they will also enter the invoice value, if there's freight, if there's specific discount they need to enter. And when that is done, they will submit the invoice, which then initiates an email notification to the buyer side that an invoice has been uploaded. And this email can go to either the purchasing team or finance team, whoever you decide is the recipient of this. We just had a question today from one of our different solutions that if you send an invoice to one location, if another one can get a copy, of course we can configure that as well. So the buyer will have a dashboard very similar to the supplier, with the invoice number to the left, the PO number, what supplier it is, and the overview on the top that the POs which have not received invoices, this screen is where invoices have been received, etc. They will be able to open the system and get into the more detailed level of the invoice with the original PO value, the invoiced value, whether there's a freight cost. In this case, the freight cost is the deviation from the original PO value. And when they're happy with that, they can add a comment, which can then go back into the system. They will approve the invoice, and that's it. But the system will also have the possibility for the buyer to either get the original invoice sent to them, or we will do it as an API, so you can import the data straight into your system. So the full automation will be achieved with a solution like this. So that's the basic invoicing platform, which is going to be live very, very soon. This is contrary to what we have also tried in the past, to launch products which have not been tested properly in the market. What we are doing here is that we are launching a solution that we know from some very large and significant buyers is sufficient for their purpose. And then we have sought a lot of input from other buyers and will continue to do that. So you can consider this as not work in progress, but first version of something that will be developed to cater for all the things that are needed in an invoice, a full-blown invoice solution. Thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show.